Cool. So as we see, we have WillCO2st running in an emulator, and I just want to take you through some of the features that WillCO2st can do. So the first thing you will see when you open version 1 of WillCO2st is you'll be asked to select your region of origin. It's important to remember or recognize that the first version of WillCO2st uses specifically UK-based data. So if you want really accurate region and time-specific electricity to carbon dioxide emission equivalent conversions, you really need to be residing in the UK, but we will eventually take future versions of the app, so to speak, around the world and integrate other data as we build up this community. So let's just start by showing that we are in the UK. Here we just get a confirmation that we have configured the region of the app and that we do have accurate and valid emissions available to us as users within the United Kingdom. So we see the main menu of WillCO2st, and there are a lot of features that are open to us immediately. So let's go through iteratively. So the first is that what WillCO2st is specifically designed to do is to enable you as a PhD student or an experimenter or someone that has access to energy ratings of a particular application, like using a computer for so many hours, whatever, to log every time that you are doing that experiment or that activity to get accurate indications of how much carbon dioxide equivalent emissions you're using. And then over time, you can build quite a reliable and accurate appendix of information related to your research. So let's have a look at logging a new experiment. So let's say we are just starting using the app. In this case, I've already had calcium imaging, which is a type of neuroscience experiment. But let's say we want to develop log a new type of experiment. So let's say we are doing, I don't know, depends what you want to name the experiment. We could name it, tracking animals. And let's say within our particular configuration, so we've taken a power meter, looked at how much power that our computer, our monitor, our camera, our technology that we're using to track certain animals is. And let's say the kilowatt hour of this is some random number. Let's say it's 0.14 kilowatt hours. So we have this experiment, and we can log it for future use. So as you see here, it records the fact that tracking animals within your particular configuration uses that amount of energy. It's important when we are determining this energy result to try to do our energy estimations using our power meters multiple times in order to make sure we have a robust estimate of that amount of power. Obviously, there may be some slight fluctuations depending on the precise use of it, but it is a very good first estimate and barometer. And indeed, you can become more detailed if you want to be. I imagine tracking different types of animals or using different cameras obviously will require different amounts of energy. And indeed, there is an interesting level of research about how much the age of a camera will affect its power rating. But this is everything that the app can at least empower you to do. So by utilizing this app, you can start to grapple with these kind of questions and hopefully publish some interesting carbon appendices. But before we talk about that, let's just go back to the app. So we have our experiment. In this case, is animal tracking. Or tracking animals, should I say. We want to pick the region of the UK we're in. So at least in the help section, if you don't know what your region is, you can see the help section and that will give you an indication about what region you're in. So for me in Scotland, I am obviously in South Scotland. So once we select a region that we're in and an experiment that we wish to perform, the screen for logging an experiment becomes available to us. So we see some buttons here. So let's talk about what the buttons are. Obviously, we have a start and stop button. So this is you obviously trivially and hopefully intuitively, you will start the button. Press the start button when you are going to start an experiment, and stop that button when you stop that experiment. Before we have a go at this, let's have a look at some of the other information on the sheet. So we see logged underneath the start and stop button an indication of something called carbon time. So logged into WillCO2st, which is communicating with the carbon intensity API, which, as we detail in our publications, is a free integrating software that is published by the National Grid of the UK that gives you an indication, both modeled and refined based on actual data coming into the National Grid, how much energy is being used in particular regions of the UK at that given moment. We've aggregated these averages over a year to give the users an indication about whether or not the time at which they're starting to conduct an experiment is a high, medium, or low carbon time. So a high carbon time is we're currently at a time of the day in which there is a relatively high amount of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions that are likely going to be generated per every kilowatt hour, as opposed to doing it in a low carbon time. We hope that this very simple but powerful feature can at least guide researchers into doing energy intensive research at times that are less carbon intensive, without them having to remember what those times are, having to go through loads of websites and spreadsheets to find if that time is there. Have some indication of this. Indeed, if you click the I button, you can see the figure that is in our main carbon accounting figure. Carbon accounting paper that gives an indication of those times. Indeed, you can maybe infer the time at which I'm recording this particular recording. Fun times. Additionally, we also have the actual number that is reported by the Carbon Intensity API, just as a form of ground truth to make sure that we are, the Carbon Intensity API is being actively communicated with through the phone. So in the south of Scotland at this precise moment, every kilowatt hour roughly generates around 12 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent. So this gives us, as I said, an indication about the carbon intensity at this time of the day. But let's say even though it is a high carbon time, we really need to get this experiment done. We have other meta justifications for doing this. So let's say we start the experiment. So as we start the experiment, we would press start on our phone, leave our phone at the side. It's important to recognize that you can move between different screens on your phone by just phasing out of the app, and the timer will still run. So remember, as the experiment is going on, to come back to your phone at the end of the experiment and click stop. So let's say we are tracking animals. So let's see what we can see as the data is being dynamically read out. So we can see the time of the experiment. So currently we've been talking for 30 seconds. In that time, this is the amount of watt energy we have used based on our prior kilowatt hour user inputted information. And as you can see, dynamically, if we were doing this experiment right now, this is how much effective carbon dioxide equivalent emissions we produced, around 0.02 grams. So we would keep logging this. So we would keep this timer going as long as our experiment is going. Eventually, obviously, we stop an experiment. At this time, we have an optionality to store that information. This is hopefully something we will do. Cool. So we've logged that information. So as you can see here, you are immediately drawn to just the table that contains all of the information you've currently logged using the app. So I can see here, these are the list of experiments I have been doing. You can see the data which you've done them, the type of experiment, the region you were when you did this experiment, the carbon dioxide equivalent kilowatt hour particular measure at that time, the amount of carbon dioxide you produced, or estimated to be produced, and the time at which that experiment was done. With this type of data, simple table, but we can select certain entries. Let's say we made a mistake and we don't want to log that particular experiment. We can simply delete this and it will be removed from the data entry. After we log, hopefully meticulously, or at least as meticulously as time and energy will allow, over time we will build quite a reliable data set about how much carbon dioxide equivalent emissions we have produced, and we can simply export these as CSV documents for further analysis within things like Python pipelines, Origin, or whatever type of visualization pipeline you've generated, probably from your own research. And there's multiple ways in which you can send this. I often just send it by an attachment on Gmail, fairly reliable. Cool. So this is our experiment. At any time, for instance, if we are running an experiment and we make a false start or we have to restart, we can always reset the timer without having to go back and start the whole app again. So that is one of the features of WillCO2st, i.e. being able to log new experiments. And indeed, within the experiment data tab, we can see those experiments that we've currently logged. Cool. Alongside looking at specific experiments, we can also try to log successfully the travel-related emissions based on what we're doing in our PhD. So if we click the travel button, we are presented with this page. So what this page has done is it's taken conversion factor data reported by the UK government. So the UK government reports every year the average emissions for certain types of vehicles based on reported company and manufacturer information by law. So it is fairly accurate, at least there's a very realistic estimate of the amount of energy, or sorry, the amount of carbon dioxide that these types of vehicles produce. So I don't travel by motorbike, but that is the default option. So we can see a vast array of different types of vehicles that we can travel by. So let's say I live somewhere that is a little bit further away from the lab that affords me the ability to walk, and I take a non-London bus. As part of the carbon appendix of my PhD, or trying to estimate the total carbon load and sustainability of my research, may wish to factor in the travel to and from labs, or to and from conferences, or to and from training events that are outside of my university, in order to gain a better and more holistic picture of my sustainability of my PhD. Within this, then, we are afforded two options. The first is we're afforded a manual entry option, where we can determine so we can input the distance in kilometers that the bus travel likely to take. You can use, for instance, the Google Maps Matrix API, as in just put Google Maps and put your start and end location. It will give you a rough estimate, actually quite a reliable estimate based on the road that you traveled, the distance that you traveled. So for instance, let's say I take a 15-kilometer bus journey to the lab. I could store this, get an entry of how much carbon dioxide equivalent we likely produced, and indeed we can see this logged here. Here then we have a very simple and quick way to determine very common distances or common modes of emissions that we may produce during our PhD, and indeed we can repeat this if we wish to have a more effective log. So every day we can say, okay, I've done this, I've done that, so on and so forth. And indeed, just like in the previous example of experimental data, we can export this to a CSV as a CSV to very many different modes like Gmail or the Drive. And indeed, we can use Python code to duplicate this if we needed to. Alternatively, if you want something that is a bit more reliable, let's say you're driving, but you take a variable route, and indeed you don't want to go through the energy barrier of having to do the Google API matrix. WillCO2st also allows you to track dynamically how much distance you've accrued. So here it just uses the GPS of your phone and tracks as the phone moves, and therefore gives you a very reliable estimate of the distance that you've traveled in that particular mode. So obviously you will get a prompt just to make sure that the GPS is allowed to function on your app, and gives you caution about that you need to make sure you stay on this page, or at the very least do not press return home, so that it can consistently allow you to track. So you get a spinning box, give an indication the tracker is working. Obviously, I'm using an emulator in this instance, so my computer, I'm not going to start running around with my computer in case I drop it. But the distance the distance barometer would increase over time. End our journey, store it. Very good. And indeed, as I've said, you can duplicate or you can delete at will and export at will. Cool. So that is 3 features of the WillCO2st. So logging your experiments, looking at experimental data, travel costs. The fourth and almost final feature of WillCO2st is that you can log direct emissions. So for instance, in my research, I will end up releasing directly CO2 into the air as I anesthetize flies during animal sorting and rearing. Here then I can determine the release rate using like a gas displacement method, or whatever inventive methods you wish to use to determine how much gas you're releasing. And here it provides an easy way of me to log how much carbon dioxide or relevant gas I have released based on the method I'm using. Here we're hoping things like carbon appendices can provide useful barometers for individuals about the range of different direct release emissions from different techniques within your field. So for instance, in my field of Drosophila research, direct releasing of CO2 via anesthetization could theoretically vary massively depending on the technique of the method of delivery of that CO2. For me, I think it is around 2.1 grams per minute. This is what I found out. The purpose of this app is not only just for us to log in, but also to instrumentally use the app in order to reveal what the different release rates could be within different technological practices, publish it, have a good discussion throughout labs, and therefore find methods to displace and reduce and sequester this amount of carbon. Cool. And similarly with other features, you can log this as before. Finally, parts of the app to talk about. Obviously, we have an information version of the app. Here we can describe everything that I'm basically talking about. And indeed, we can see this region selector. So if a nice fun Inkscape drawing, if you needed it, to see what region of the UK you're in. And indeed, I think this is quite simple to work out on Google. And additionally, you can see the region that you have selected, just so you know that if you return to the app, what the base of the location selector is using. Last but not least is the more fun aspect. So this is the contributing to our codex. So this app is not just to allow individuals to build their build their knowledge of how sustainable their PhD research is, and then from that become more sustainable, hopefully, or else I don't know why you'd be doing this activity. But a part of this is we also want to have access. We would also, really like and encourage individuals to release this information in the same way as the scientific method relies and is dependent upon individuals openly accessing this information. However, we obviously also appreciate PhD students, PIs, different research labs are in some ways quite overloaded with the amount of things they have to do on their daily basis. So here what the app allows you to do is it allows you to take the information of experiments and travel costs and send us this CSV document. Here then we would take as many users use it and to visualize and inform the wider public and scientific community about the general uses of individuals in different fields. So in here we have the contribute to the codex. Here then, this will send the information that you have logged to us, so myself, Rajini, Amy, and Stefan, to which we will maybe use this information in future publications, obviously with accreditation to the individuals using it and with the permission of those using it. Indeed, we might just publish this information on our website so people are more informed about the types of information that are coming out there. So obviously, we want this to be as mutually beneficial and mutually creative as possible. So the information, this is just an optionality to provide us information so that we can see what you're doing and see how the sustainability journey and community and the carbon codex is being built over time. So here we can provide our names with the information we have, indicate whether or not we're an academic. And if you are, we'd love to know what university you're at and what your research discipline is. And here we can submit this information. So this information will be CSV documents that are sent via Gmail or whatever is required to WillCO2st, our WillCO2st email. And in here, iteratively over the years, we hope to build pages on our website and other means of distributing this information, obviously with your full accreditation. And indeed, to follow GDPR guidelines, there will be ways on our website to request the removal of this information. And indeed, at any stage of the process of visualization, you can redact this information if you contact us. Cool. So, as we return to the app. Whoop. Whoa. So, harder to do with a mouse than with a finger. Indeed, we will placehold our publications on here when they are released. Hopefully, when you see this recording, they will be. So you can, have a link to this information. Cool. So this is WillCO2st. Hopefully, I at least find it useful. I hope it is at least somewhat useful to individuals who are using this. Yeah.